see if this looks better. Yeah, that's better. Right, let's begin again. So, hi, welcome to my studio and office, which is also my bedroom. It is such, not because I don't have a spare room, I have one in that direction, but because it's bloody cold there during the winter. I'm aiming to move back in there once the weather improves, although I may not. I may end up just using it as a studio and library. So got a lot of bookcases. Anyway, that's not the point of this video. This video is going to be uploaded to my YouTube, but it's substantially different from anything else there. This is not an academic thesis. This is not me delivering a talk that I delivered somewhere else, or a recording of an assignment like I did when I was doing my master's. This is a ad lib, off the cuff discussion at a point at which I think the nature of trans activism is changing, and I want to contribute something to that. I do not expect to ever be someone who would appear on TV, at least not at this point, or would appear in the press or on radio. I don't exhibit enormous femininity to make that acceptable at a time in which our backs are against the wall. That's for other people to do, but I want to contribute to this in some way. And here I am contributing a couple of points which I think are very, very important. The first of these, and by the way, I'm doing this, how typical is this? I'm using a pink fountain pen filled with a pink ink, which I mixed in memory of Sixo. Very feminist, very on brand for me. Pink notebook in which I've made some notes. So with all of that preamble, which has lasted at least a minute or two, aside, let's get on to what I think are some important points to consider at this point. So, Katie Montgomery spoke recently about the need to change how we're doing trans activism, and she's done this in at least a couple of videos now. The most recent one brought up good points about how we should not be conceding any points to gender criticals. And I wanted to talk about a specific way in which I think this gets done. And that is the idea that somehow this is all about hating men, and trans femmes are, for these people, men. This may seem shocking given the way that discussions in this area normally go, and given that a lot of the, shall we call them, foot soldiers of this movement display that as a tendency. And I want to get on to what the difference there is in a moment. But first of all, I want to say something very, very important. This has recently come up in a discussion of a Holocaust, an organization that looks at Holocaust, that looks at genocide, and they discussed gender critical talking points in terms of, first point in the book, misandry. I want to say now that misandry does not exist. Misandry is normally seen as this equal and opposite version of misogyny that women engage in. Women do not have the power within society to engage in this kind of systematic discrimination. And secondly, if this did exist, if there was a widespread movement among women to be distrustful of men, to be scared of men, and this does exist, but this is not misandry, then that movement, that tendency, which is not a movement, is individual women's experiences that when they get together, they discuss and they realize that they all have had the experiences that have led to this. This fear and hatred of men, this distrust of men, this feeling unsafe around men, is a rational response to misogyny, patriarchy, and rape culture. It is rational and good for women to be suspicious of men. It is rational and good of women to be fearful of men. This is a good thing. This is something I do not know a single woman who does not exhibit. If we are arguing that somehow this is a bad thing, we are automatically walking into an open trap that these people have set for us. The fear and distrust of women and femmes towards men is rational. It is good. It is a way women and femmes defend themselves against rape, violence, and sexual and emotional abuse. Secondly, the idea that this is a foundational text, a foundational ground on which the gender critical movement sits, is simply wrong. What in fact we have is a movement which is not anti-men, in which men are given prominent positions, in which men fund the movement, in which men, like Donald Trump right now, enact the policies they wish. These kinds of movements which denied power or membership to men among women have and still exist. These constitute things like political lesbianism and the lesbian separatist movement. Movements like these deny existence to men. These are part of radical feminism. And radical feminism is not trans-exclusionary. The whole idea, the TERF, trans-exclusionary radical feminist, is an identifiable ideology and a thing that you can remark someone exhibits, comes from radical feminists who use the term to describe people who would come on message boards and come on discussion groups and derail every discussion with how much they hated trans people. Radical feminism and its constituent parts, such as political lesbianism and lesbian separatism, are not inherently anti-trans. And most radical feminists are not anti-trans. We do not hear their voice because these people refuse to engage with a misogynistic media. Because we do not hear their voice does not mean that their voice does not exist. If we listen, we can hear their voice, and we do not deny their voice as trans femmes and as feminists. Indeed, in some ways, I would describe myself as a radical feminist. My feminism is inherently radical. It's not radical in the way that, to some extent, a lot of radical feminism became a movement which said that misogyny was the main driving force of everything the women experience. I think is decidedly more complicated than that. But I consider radical feminists to be my sisters and my siblings. These people are allies in a fight in which I am engaged, and these people are not anti-trans, regardless of what anti-trans so-called feminists want you to think. So that gets one of the issues with this out of the way. The other issue with this is that since we can see that this is not a movement like the radical feminist movements of political lesbianism and lesbian separatism that denies males the power to be a part of the movement, then we have to ask what role the hatred of men and the distrust of men fills within this movement. And my point here, and this is a very important point, is that it is not foundational to the movement, but it is a tool of radicalization. It's a way that the movement gets women to engage with it. Because we are talking about this as though their experience of men is somehow wrong. That's what we're doing when we doubt this in any way whatsoever. We should embrace the fact that women are scared and fearful of men. This will take power away from them. This will take power away from a radicalization tool that they are using. This is something they use to radicalize women, to get them on board, and then to shovel progressive levels of radical crap at them. This is a radicalization pipeline, and this is one of the entry points. It is nothing more than propaganda, a tool to make what we might call the foot soldiers of the gender critical movement engage with it and become radicalized. And we have to admit this. We have to engage with how women feel about men, and we have to stand in agreement with this, because it is also my experience of men. That was a bit of a rant, but I think this is very, very important. And we really, really are walking into a trap here. Now, an issue which may arise from this is the issue of trans men. Where do trans men fit in a trans rights movement which engages openly with women's distrust, suspicion, and hatred of men, which I will again say is absolutely a rational response? So where do they sit? They still exist within our movement. They still have a voice. They're still there. But if a person is presenting as female, as a woman, and wants to be treated as a woman, and wants, as we are arguing, deserves to be treated as a woman, then we must admit the trans men who pass are going to be seen as men. You cannot expect women and femmes to know that they are trans men, and I've had this experience myself. I've been suspicious of a man and found out that they're a trans man, and yeah, trans men have a history with misogyny. They have a history with patriarchy. They have a history with rape culture, which sets them apart from cis men. But hold on a sec. But I'll edit that out of the video. I am doing something just now. Can I call you later? That was a distraction, wasn't it? That's going to be edited out. Where was I? Yes, there might be a bit of a jump here because I can't remember exactly where I was because I was ad-libbing. But trans men who pass are going to be seen as men. That does not mean that we deny the history that they have with misogyny, with rape culture, with the patriarchy. But we admit that a passing trans man is going to be seen by women and femmes as men. I don't know if I've said this before, but I've done this. I've been distrusting of a man and then found out they're a trans man, and that changes how I feel towards them. But we cannot expect people to know that a trans man or a trans masculine person is trans, has that history. Otherwise, we are going to start talking about being able to tell, which is again conceding ground. Every way we look on this issue, we are in danger of conceding ground and handing talking points towards the people who hate us, of granting name power, of already being in the back foot. So I say this now to sum up this lengthy section. Misandry does not exist, and the fear and hatred and distrust of men is a rational response on the part of women and femmes. Further, this is not a foundational part of the anti-trans movement. It is a radicalisation tool. It's propaganda, which is used to keep people in check, to keep them scared, to keep them traumatized. One of the things we can do by doing this is to free them from this trauma, or at least begin to free them from this trauma. And that's an important thing to do. And lastly, to conclude this section before I talk about something much more nebulous, trans men are still welcome within the movement, trans men and trans masks, but we have to accept that a passing trans man is going to be seen as a man, and women and femmes are going to have a reaction towards that. Are they simply the same as cis men? No, because they were brought up with misogyny. They weren't brought up to hate women. But women and femmes can't know that as soon as they meet a person without claiming that we always know, and we do not always know. That's another concession and another thing we must fight. Right, so that was a rant, and some of what I've said might seem objectionable. I do have fear and distrust of men. That's rational. I have been raped, I've been sexually assaulted, I've been objectified. I have had to run from a gang of rapists who wanted to rape and kill me. Being fearful and distrusting of men is a rational response to that. And it's a response that every woman I know has. Right, so that very strong bit is over and done with. I want to talk about something more nebulous now, and it's the way that a disengagement with the media has allowed us to become the other. Important in this discussion is going to be the work of this philosopher, Emmanuel Levinas. Levinas is a philosopher of ethics who argues for a kind of meta-ethics. The ethics isn't a part of philosophy or an add-on to other philosophical endeavours, but they should be foundational to philosophy. And I'm going to particularly talk about his essay, Is Ontology Fundamental? But what I want to talk about right now is that we have been cast as other by our disengagement with the media, our disengagement with the world. It is good that we retreated into our own community and established a strong form of community and established things like trans rights, where trans people can write and they can learn to write, they can learn to organize. These are all very, very important things. But if we are, what, 0.3% of the population, or maybe as much as 1%, depending on who you speak to and what studies you accept, that's a tiny number. Most of us, even though we're out, I've never been anything other than out about my sexuality and my gender identity and my history with gender. But I don't talk about it in most of the interactions with people. In most of my interactions with people, I'm just read as a woman. That's why I'm a fucking dyke. You know, I look like a big fucking dyke. I don't look straight. I look like a gay woman. And this is true for most of us. You know, for most of us, we're just viewed as women in our daily interactions with people as women for various reasons, even for people who don't pass. I'm not a fan of that term because it's taking a term from Black activism and transposing into ours, and I'm never comfortable with that sort of thing. If I was really clever, I would pull up a copy of the book Passing here. I'm not that clever. I'm never prepared in advance. But even people who don't pass, if they're presenting as feminine, a lot of the time people react towards that. So most people have interacted with probably multiple tons of trans people in their lives, even though we're a tiny part of the population. We're right there, but they have possibly never knowingly interacted with a trans person. And this is important because it allows us to be cast as other. And this is where I want to bring in Levinas, who talks about the process of othering. He talks about ontological system whereby we seek to understand things. So ontology is in the simplest terms, is a school of philosophy which looks at knowledge and wants to understand how we know things, what it means to know. And Levinas argues that this is a problematic way of going about a fundamental understanding of philosophy. Levinas argues that if we are looking at other living things, whether that be animal life, plant life, or other human beings, and we are seeing and being to be understood on an ontological level, we are looking at being to be used and understood. And Levinas points out in his Ontology Fundamental, I really do recommend it, it's a fantastic read, that to know something is to use it. We know how to use a tool because we use the tool. We know what a screwdriver is, not because we see a screwdriver and we understand its purpose, but because we use a screwdriver to screw it or unscrew a screw. We know what a hammer is because we use it to hammer in or take out a nail. And Levinas wants to point out the problems inherent in that to interactions with other people, what it means to be with another person, to be engaging with another person. And if we use a system whereby we seek to understand on an ontological basis, then when we interact with other people, we see other people as tools, as data points. And without our involvement in the media, without our involvement in the world, in an open, bruising and difficult way. This is what's allowed. Because one of the things that Levinas talks about in the same essay and elsewhere in his work, this is in a career spanning decades, he first, well, I think it's my first, done quite well so far. He argues that the ability to construct another, to construct a person as a tool, as a thing to be understood and used, is only possible if we never face the other, if we never engage with the other, both literally and figuratively, to use his phrase, face to face. Once we are confronted with the other, once we see the other, we are forced into accepting one of two positions. We either see them as a human being, or we continue down this route of dehumanization. And most people, when they interact with a person, are not wanting to dehumanize them. This is something that you need to be radicalized to do. You need to already be radicalized by hate and blinded by it. That might be a bit off. No, right. Let me phrase that in a way which is not ableist. See, we have problems. We have lacunas, things that we can't see. And that's a lacuna right there. I used an ableist word, but hate forms lacunas. It forms things past which we can't see. And unless you have been forced into accepting that lacuna and embracing it and allowing it to flourish, you will want to see others, you will interact with others, and you will see human beings. You will see animals that deserve respect. You will see a natural world that is not to be trampled underfoot. And we are not in that position because we have refused to be in that position. We have to present ourselves face to face. We have to be out there challenging the possibility of constructing us as the other, of our dehumanization. And part of that is to be seen. This can be being seen in the local community. This can be being seen by people you interact with, but this can also be being seen in the media, being seen in the news. We have to do this. Our back is against the wall. Things are getting harder and harder. There's an effective, no, there is a genocide unfolding in America against trans people. We cannot imagine that that can happen here. That can happen here in Europe. It could. We have to do everything we can to challenge that. And these are some of the suggestions I would say that, well, these are some of the things that I would suggest that we take on board to do that. Thank you for your time. And for anyone who originally followed my YouTube for talks about music and about labour and its ilk, then I'm sorry. You've been subjected to something which is still connected to the subjects of my research. Thank you very much.